The Western genre, which consists of short stories, novellas, magazines, and comics, became immensely popular during the mid-20th century. These works gained their positive notoriety among the American population through their ability of capitalizing on the deeds of what were real people who had lived in the old Western frontier, and ultimately blurred the line between fact and fiction for the readership. The works associated with this period originated from the publication and mass production of inexpensive British magazines known as penny dreadful and dime novels, terms which now carry a belittling undertone. Cheap books were pumped out en masse and frequently contained highly unoriginal stories, if not ineptly plagiarized ones. These types of paperback novels were distributed throughout North America as early as the 19th century. Published in June 1860, Malaysca, the Indian wife of the White Hunter, is considered the first dime novel. Due to the great success of the dime novels that focused on the American Old West, the Western genre emerged as a major staple in American literature during the mid-20th century. Typically, these stories are set during the late 19th century in the American Old West, usually in the period between the American Civil War of 1865 and the early 1900s. These novels primarily focus on the conquest of the Wild West, the conflict between cowboys and Indians, as well as the pursuit of riches. When the production of pulp magazines exploded, Western novels positively benefited from this trend. The release of Owen Wister's The Virginian in 1902 spurred on the early 20th century Western craze. The novel describes the life of a cowboy on a cattle ranch in Wyoming who neglects his chance of walking away when facing a dangerous situation. Similarly, critically acclaimed authors who pioneered the genre with their work, such as Luke Short and Louis L'Amour, grew in popularity. Their frontier stories about cowboys who tamed the Wild West were distributed throughout the entire country and were well received by the public. Their characters were admired by children and adults alike. The values and morals presented throughout these novels influenced the public in positive ways, bringing on a change in the zeitgeist. Children aspired to become brave men who, when faced with danger, did not crumble under pressure and stood for justice. The genre peaked in popularity around the early 1960s, largely due to the quick succession of Western shows and movies on American television. Series like Bonanza were extremely successful and seen almost on every screen throughout the nation. These created also an upward spike in the success of Western literature. However, readership of Western literature declined in the first decade of the 21st century, among a new generation of readers who weren't being able to relate to the struggles and stories in these novels. Bookstores, sadly, no longer carry a large selection of such works, attributable to low public demand. Nonetheless, Western novels are still released annually.
The actual events surrounding the lives of historical persons like Wild Bill Hickok, Wyatt Earp, Billy the Kid, and Jesse James were spun into lurid, legendary tales that exalted these characters to the status of a once-alive hero or villain, a classic archetype. The adventures of the first white settlers of the western coast, many of whom were mere plainsmen, scouts, buffalo hunters, and trappers, became popular to the eastern population of the states via the imagination of authors like Zane Grey, A. H. Lewis, Owen Wister, and Louis L'Amour. For example, Wild Bill Hickok was allegedly an expert marksman from an early age and went on to become the sheriff of the lawless Hays City in Kansas and marshal of Abilene. During his tenure, he lived peacefully, checking liquor licenses at hotels in his jurisdiction. He gained his notoriety at 24 years of age, working as a staple boy, when he found himself in a shootout with a particularly lethal landowner, David McCanley's, and his company. The McCanleys were demanding an overdue payment from a station manager when Hickok shot the armed proprietor and two other thugs he had brought along. The first ever recorded quick-draw duel was between him and a former friend, Davis Tutt, whom Hickok killed at close range. This renowned event soon inspired the slew of stories that emerged from the classic idea of the quick-draw duel, which, contrary to popular belief and portrayal, was not commonplace prior to the 1870s. This event also led to an interview with a popular magazine. The article cited that Hickok had killed hundreds of men and had committed other fabled deeds. Apparently, the academic lethargy of the mainstream media, coupled with the gullibility of its readership, a phenomenon that never quite seems to die out, led to new claims of his brilliant yet unconfirmed exploits. Hickok was both revered and feared, and so he didn't bother to dispel or confirm the circulating tales. Indeed, he even reported to have fought a group of bears with a knife and his bare hands. Thomas Berger's 1964 novel and best-known work, entitled Little Big Man, portrays the exploits of a 111-year-old gunman, Jack Crabb, who crosses paths occasionally with Wild Bill, the Earps, and Buffalo Bill. Since many of these accounts are unconfirmed, the books and other works that follow the stories of Wild Bill and his contemporaries involve a blurred line between the elements of truth and fiction. This medley of folklores becomes essential to the Western genre, and attempting to isolate the two can only be done at this point through common sense and critical analysis. However, it should be stated that doing so would invalidate the charismatic mysteries and realities that surround this period of literary history, which should be appreciated as a whole.
Soda pop he wants.
Anything wrong with that, stranger?
Oh, not a thing, friend. In fact, I admire the style of it.
Might I ask who I are addressing?
I'm Wild Bill Hickok.
Well, I'm pleased to meet you, I'm sure.
The pleasure's mutual, friend. Bring your soda pop over here and sit for a while.
Next, onto the heroes and villains of the Western. Heroes. Judge Roy Bean. Judge Roy Bean was born in the 1820s in Kentucky. At an early age, he moved to Mexico with his brothers. He later had to flee the country because he killed a man in a barroom fight. He again did the same in San Diego and fled to Los Angeles. In that city, he was found by friends of the man he killed and was hung. But the rope broke and he had left the city alive. He moved to San Antonio, and for about 16 years he lived there as a businessman. While living in San Antonio, Mr. Bean was appointed as a justice of the peace and notary by the public. He was not completely well versed in matters of the law, as shown by some bizarre and foolish rulings of his. Once he fined a dead man for carrying a concealed weapon. He also freed a man accused of killing a Chinese rail worker on the grounds that he knew no law that said it was a crime to kill a Chinaman. He died in the town of Langtree in 1903.